Programme Committee. I've had apologies from the cooperative member Beth Allender and also from Councillor Lyndon Jones. I'm going to just ask everybody in the room to say who they are so that people online can know who's actually here. So if I start with Wendy over there, Wendy.
Councillor Wendy Lewis, Fynaloedd Ward.
Councillor Chris Hawley, Carket Ward, Cumbulla Ward.
Debbie Smith, Legal Advisor.
Victoria Holland.
Peter Black, Chair, and Bridge.
Bridge Madhar, Scrutiny Team.
Okay, so people online know who's actually in the room now. So I'm told that's good practice, and that's feedback we've been getting as well, that we should do that more often. So, okay. Right, anybody got any disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest at all? No? Okay, thank you. So item 3 then is prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips. Unless anyone pipes up, I'm going to move on from that then to the minutes of the last meeting from the 18th of April relating to crime and disorder scrutiny. I go through them for accuracy on page 1, page 2, page 3, and page 4. Can we accept those minutes accurate, please? Thank you. Okay, item 5 is public question time. We have no public questions received, so I'm going to move on to the next item, which is urgent items. I'm going to have to read this out, I'm afraid. Pursuant to section 101B brackets 4 brackets B of the Local Government Act 1972, following councillor requests since the publication of the committee agenda, 2 reports being considered by the Cabinet meeting on Thursday, the 18th of May, are being added to this agenda as urgent items, namely Cabinet Agenda Item 10, Financial Procedure Rule 7, additional projects to be included in the capital budget and programme 2022-23 to 2027-28, Economic Recovery Fund, approved schemes, brackets exceeding £1 million. And secondly, Cabinet Agenda Item 14, Financial Procedure Rule 5, Additional Revenue Provision for Residual Economic Recovery Fund 2023-24. The reason for urgency is to enable pre-decision scrutiny on those reports ahead of Cabinet decision. The Cabinet reports were published following the publication of the Scrutiny Committee agenda. They are due to be considered by Cabinet on the 18th of May 2023. To enable pre-decision scrutiny on these reports, they need to be considered at today's Scrutiny Committee meeting. These will be dealt with as new items 6 and 7 on today's agenda, and reports were circulated to members, to committee members, on the 11th of May for review. I take it, are we happy with that? Yes? Okay, thank you very much. I had to read all that out because the lawyer's watching me, so it had to be done. Right, to facilitate discussion and deal with questions, we've got Councillor Rob Stewart, the Cabinet Member for Economy, Finance and Strategy, and of course Leader with us. Ben Smith is with us, Director of Finance and Section 151 Officer, and Jeff Bacon, the Head of Property Services. All of them are online. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take them both together, if that's okay. So I'm going to ask either Ben or the Leader to introduce both of them, and then if people asking questions, they can specify which report you're asking a question on. So, Leader, do you have any points you want to make to this before we ask questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll start, perhaps if I go to Financial Procedure Rule 5, and obviously, as we've all had the legal advice in terms of the differential between Appendix A and Appendix B. So I'll focus on Appendix B, if that's okay, Chair, because that's the part that's up for, I guess, discussion and scrutiny. The elements within those members will recognise from the budget presentation and the budget discussion that we had in the chamber back in March. There is a short descriptor with each of the proposed investments, that being free buses at 600,000, local bus support 400,000, local levelling up for areas of multiple deprivation up to £1 million, further investment in new play areas not already established, 500,000, assistance to create nature trails in communities, 100,000. Security equipment, special events, new legislation is due to come in later this year, which will place additional burden on local authorities to add additional safety measures to local events of certain sizes. So we're preparing for some additional capital investment there to allow local events to continue to take place. CCTV cameras, 50,000. That is adding some additional equipment so that where members perhaps have hotspot antisocial behaviour areas in their wards, it will allow us to utilise the new CCTV system and to move domes and other mobile equipment around more easily in order to assist members with CCTV coverage in their wards on a temporary basis if that is required. We then move on to additional bins. You know, we've been have a steady programme of replacement of bins. This is a further 50,000 to continue that programme. Likewise, 100,000 to continue the investment in replacement bus shelters. Disabled parking bays, we have had a number of requests for additional parking bays to be created throughout wards. We have been reviewing the policy behind the scenes to make sure that it remains fit for purpose, and a further policy will be fetched forward for adoption. But this is essentially providing some money to go along with the policy so that where there are requests in wards for disabled bays, that can be provided. Likewise, dropped curbs. What we're talking about here is connectivity on street corners, etc., rather than dropped curbs for premises. So this is around ensuring that where we have access routes, that we have the ability for people who may be in wheelchairs or have mobility issues to have drop curbs added to certain parts of the ward. On to the next one, which is patch team. That's 450,000 to continue with the enhanced patch programme. As you know, we added additional monies and resources last year. We're continuing with that patch programme at the higher level so that we can get more repairs done more quickly. So 450,000 on that. And then 100,000 for youth engagement, and that is to assist us with engaging hard to reach youths who may be at risk of becoming embroiled in antisocial behaviour or other matters of concern. So these are support programmes of engagement with young people. Enhanced drainage cleansing. Again, I know members have utilised the larger services, and we've made a significant progress in dealing with blocked drains and getting drains cleaned, so with the aim of reducing the risk of flooding in our communities. We know that that is a growing risk given the climate change that we're experiencing. So again, continuing with that enhanced programme. We already made the commitment and have rolled it out for the Coronation Road closures. So this was removing the fees that would otherwise have been picked up by residents for road closures. So there's a nominal amount allocated there in order to make sure that they face no fees if they wanted to create street parties for the coronation. COVID memorial, members may recall that during the COVID pandemic, we received numerous requests around whether we were intending to create a memorial to all those who gave their time, their effort, or lost their lives during COVID, and it is something we committed to at the time. This is a nominal allocation. Now, we don't have a detailed proposal before us, but it is something we committed to consider during the COVID pandemic. And then finally, additional car parking offers. Members will know that as part of the new parking regime, we also trailed the fact that we would introduce additional car parking offers, which would be overlaid on the new car park fee structure. And this 500,000 nominal allocation is there to support parking offers in the city centre, and also to allow us, obviously, to assist with rollout of offers in the county. So, Chair, hopefully that's helpful in terms of a quick canter through of the proposals that you have in Appendix B of the papers. I know that Mr. Smith wants to add anything.
Ben, do you want to add anything?
I'd perhaps just take the opportunity to remind why we are where we are with this, and just take you back a couple of years when we had some very substantial underspends and cabinet, and it was a cabinet decision to set up the original £20 million into the Economic Recovery Fund. That was in anticipation of outturn for 2021, which was subsequently confirmed. Then in the outturn for 21-22, Cabinet received my outturn report and agreed a further 25 million. So that's how the ERF got to a total of 45 million pounds. There have been 2 annual reviews of reserves reported to Council, which has confirmed that. The whole principle of the ERF was to enable monies to be dispersed, delegated to the leader, the chief exec, and myself. Clearly, we had to make a pause to the arrangements given the very substantial inflation costs that we were facing on energy, and that is the reason why we've paused. But then it is for the executive, in my view, to restart what are one-off allocations from the existing set-aside reserve. So that's why you've got the FPR 5 before you in advance of Cabinet on Thursday. The FPR 7 is much more straightforward. Again, it was subject to delegation and the schemes were agreed. But in line with the Constitution, to get any scheme over £1 million added to the capital programme, it requires an FPR 7. So that's why that one is coming separately. And you will be aware that there are a raft of other items on Cabinet for FPR 7 reports and other things where various other sources of funding are sought. But it's to regularise adding things to the capital programme for the FPR 7. And you will see in terms of my financial implications and officer advice, it is a little bit early in the financial year in one sense, but recognising that we put the whole thing on pause and we want to restart something that was created over 2 years ago, it's not unreasonable in my view that the administration wants to restart that. And I have taken a view that, having due regard to the likely pressures in the current year, having also due regard to all of these are one-off items, that it is affordable for Cabinet to make those decisions subject to any advice that you may give in terms of feedback and any decisions that might actually ultimately be taken on Thursday. But I thought it might be useful just to remind why we are where we are with the timelines on these things and what things were previously delegated and what things, even if they were delegated, still requires a further formal decision of Cabinet vis-a-vis the FPR 7s. I think that's all I'd add in terms of the procedurals around the items. Yeah, nothing further to add. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ben. I've got just a general question before we open it up. If Cabinet approves these reports on Thursday, how much uncommitted money remains in the economic recovery fund?
So probably best that I answer that one in terms of my best estimate, having due regard. My view is that it is then fully committed. Doesn't mean it's all spent, because don't forget the money was set aside for the energy fund one-off for this year, but it is also an anticipation that there'll be some left in it for the following year. But my assessment overall is that when I take into account what was set aside for inflation, what is likely to be drawn from inflation when Cabinet receives reports in year, what was set aside for contingency, and what Cabinet will make decisions on, that is that when you wash it all through, it will effectively mean that the ERF is fully committed, but that does include a prior commitment to effectively have a set of money for next year's one-off energy fund. Members will recall in Council I gave advice that we were not in a position, given that there was no UK government support, to fully baseline the energy fund provision. So there will be still some money sitting on the reserve at this year end, and there should still be money sitting on it at the end of next year end. But my view is it is then effectively committed, and that's why in the financial implications I am saying I'm making the assumption that it is then effectively extinguished. Further decisions will be taken by Cabinet at outturn as to whether there's any ability to top it back up. My starting presumption is not so this time. You'll be aware we had very clear advice that for several years we were going to underspend. The consistent reporting all the way through the year on Cabinet is that because inflation is elevated and there is a cost of living crisis, not only for the public but for us as a council, that it is unlikely that there'll be any further ability to top it up. So I think the long answer was given, but the short answer is fully committed, is my view at this point in time, if Cabinet is minded to make these decisions on Thursday.
Thank you, Ben. That's very helpful. I've got a question. I've had advance notice off from Councillor Mike White on nature trails. Mike, do you want to come in on your question now?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's in relation to page 83.225.225 regards the £100,000 for the nature trip, proposed nature trails within wards. Can you just inform the committee if signage has been included as part of this funding for this scheme, please?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, thank you, Councillor White. Yes, the nature team will work with local members and communities to design the nature trails, and that will include things like potentially signage, interpretation boards, educational parts to the trails. So again, the aim here is to encourage children to learn as they play, and that will include elements of signage.
Okay, Mike.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Holly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Mr. Smith. And can I thank the chairman for allowing this to take place on this particular meeting, because I asked for the call in the pre-decision scrutiny because of the sums of money involved and the fact that we didn't have an opportunity to do it prior to the budget. And I think everybody will accept that for the sake of good governance, we should have an input from scrutiny to the budget, and especially when we're talking about the sums of money we are, albeit they're all very good and projects which are close to the heart of most, if not all, the members. So I think it's important that for the sake of governance that we do this, but more, and I think there's some explanations. Can I start off on FPR 7, because as you say, I think it's probably a little bit more simple than anything else. The ERF Urban 156 plays sufficiently. Obviously that covers the whole of the city, and having looked at the projects, they seem to be quite well spread out throughout the city. So I don't think there's any issue about that. And I think the sums of money, considering how much it costs to do these play equipment, is considerable, and hopefully we can get a lot done. I think the next one about the skate facilities on ERF Urban 157, using the existing funds of 45,000. There's no actual detail on that, and I was wondering if you can't do it today, if at some stage we can have some detail about how that money is going to be spent and where it's going to be spent. The next item then is the additional allocation of £1.5 million in the budget to approve under ERF Urban 153 domiciliary care travel. I think this is the one which I have to ask for an explanation. What does it mean? Does it mean that we are actually paying for people in domiciliary care to travel, or are we getting pool cars or whatever? So if they could have some explanation about those three items before we go on.
Okay, who wants to come lead? Do you want to do this?
Yeah, if I just perhaps I'll cover the skate facilities bit, and then I'll bring Mr. Smith in around the domiciliary care travel. Essentially, with the skate facilities, we know that the facility that was established on the prom in Mumbles has been a huge success. That has helped with the demand, meet the demand that was there from skater communities, and it is a facility that's being really well used. It led to requests for similar facilities in other locations. So what we have been doing for some time is talking to representatives of the skating fraternity and for groups that use those facilities to look at what they would prefer. Now, within that, members will recall as well, I think we've got 13 existing skate facilities around the county. Some of those will need upgrading and repair and enhancement. So the sums that you see laid out there would be potentially to upgrade the existing skate facilities that exist in our parks, and then to create 2 new skate facilities of the scale and style that you see on the Mumbles foreshore. So it's enhancement in terms of strategic facilities, and again, we're looking at where the demand currently is and trying to look at potential sites that could be host to those skate facilities, but also recognizing that the skate facilities that are much smaller scale that exist in our parks across the county will also need enhancement, and we'll be looking to do that as well.
Ben, you coming on to domiciliary care?
I am, and the leader anticipated correctly that it's best that I come in on this one. This may look unusual in isolation, but there is a perfectly logical explanation for it. You will be aware the Welsh Government was relatively generous in terms of its COVID grant reimbursement support over the last few years, and also ended up making a much more significant revenue support grant offer than we were expecting in the first instance. One of the conditions of the generosity, notwithstanding that revenue support grant and other matters are not hypothecated nor directed by Welsh ministers, was that there was an expectation that all 22 authorities would commit to putting aside some of their own monies for the encouragement of additional travel arrangements for domiciliary care workers, especially in remote areas. It's designed to incentivise people to be paid to learn how to drive, to pay for taking the tests, and ultimately to potentially provide for vehicles. And it's the provision of the vehicles part, which is this element for approval for the capital programme. So it was the way in which this authority intended to discharge its commitment that all 22 authority leaders gave via the WLGA to make sure that there was investment in those sort of initiatives. It was designed to facilitate, particularly in the more rural, remote places, the wider provision of domiciliary care. So routine payment of domiciliary care workers and the provision of services would continue to fall to social services as part of their revenue budgets, but this was a specific additional expectation that the Welsh Government expected of all 22, and this authority, having set aside £45 million, this was the route felt was the best way to demonstrate that we had met that commitment to Welsh Government. So there was no prescription as to the amount. It was in officer recommendation, advice and member gift to decide a reasonable sum, and that was a sum that was determined reasonable on the advice I've given in discussion with the Director of Social Services. So it may look a little bit odd in isolation, but there is a method to the rationale for it, and other authorities will have chosen to do it through a different route because they didn't establish an economic recovery fund, but all 22 authorities were expected to make arrangements for enhanced facilities to enable people to become domiciliary care workers and expand provision, especially in more rural, remote areas. Thank you.
There's always a catch with the Welsh Government, isn't there? Chris?
Yeah, how is that going to work, Mr. Smith? Because 1.5 million, are we going to pay extra for people that are dealing with domiciliary care in Gower, in Mawr? Or are we, how are we going to do that? Or are we going to supply pool cars, that type of thing? I think that's the question that needs to be answered, is how are we going to manage that 1.5 million?
So the only bit I will answer at the moment is the provision is for the capital, so it's not paying the domiciliary care. So this isn't money to pay for additional arrangements. The operational matters will be for the Director of Social Services to determine, but this is predominantly to make arrangements for additional vehicles. It'll be an operational matter for fleet and for social services as to how they choose to deliver it. But the ongoing revenue costs will remain a matter for social services. And you're quite right, Chair. I mean, it was one of those unusual ones where it was it couldn't be mandated because the ministers can't prescribe how revenue support grant and general grant reimbursement is used, but there was that expectation. But of course, the ongoing revenue costs will have to be contained within whatever budget Cabinet recommends and ultimately Council sets for social services going forward. So there is admittedly some flesh to be put on the bones, but this is predominantly around the provision of vehicles to enable wider offers. The detail, I don't know. I mean, I want to get this regularised to enable the capital provision to be set aside to enable vehicles to be purchased, but others will probably be best placed to advise, because as you're well aware, it's still very difficult to recruit to domiciliary care and to actually get workers in the first place. But it was designed to assist it in some way. What amount is ultimately needed? As I say, each authority will have chosen its own route, because there was just an expectation that we set aside a sum to do it. I wanted to be on the generous side in terms of the advice I gave to the leader, and I think the leader equally wanted to be relatively generous in terms of a sum of money, having due regard to how big our economic recovery fund was.
I think maybe Sue can take this up for the Adult Social Services panel.
Yeah, I think there is an issue to be taken up with that, especially considering that this FPR7 has got no revenue consequences with it, where there obviously are revenue consequences with it, but albeit maybe in another portfolio or in another heading. So I think there are obvious revenue issues there. And I think there's also issues with regards to the management of this and the purchase of those vehicles. Can we move on then to the next report? When I can find it on you.
This is the FPR5 report, Chris.
Yeah, FPR5.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is a lot more complicated. There's a lot of issues in here, and again, I have to say that in the a lot of they are very worthwhile, very interesting, and very necessary. And quite a lot of these various issues, especially like the one with free bus, as you can imagine, and the local bus support. The thing I would ask is, though, again, we have, if you go to the panel, on page, whatever it is, page 88, is that? Again, no revenue costs. Now, there has to be a revenue cost at some stage with these because of the way in which they operate.
These are revenue.
Pardon?
These are revenue.
I know. No, yes, I understand that, but you have on that list a no revenue cost. There's going to be a cost, and I would ask, because of that, why have we not indicated that, or are we saying that, say, the proposed investment in enhanced drainage and cleaning, that is purely going to be the entire amount that is going to be paid out?
Perhaps if I could clarify, Chair, you are right. There is a typo in the appendix indicating that they're capital schemes. They're clearly all FPR5 revenue schemes. So those are the revenue costs, and they're designed to be one-off revenue costs. And that's probably what's misled Councillor Holly. So the revenue costs are set out in the appendix. That is the full revenue cost. They're time limited. They're one-off, and when the money ends, it ends, unless, as I indicated previously, the ERF can be topped up, or alternative decisions are made to baseline some of those proposals. So my apologies for that. I think the appendix does list each of them as capital, and they're clearly not. They are all revenue schemes on this report. My apologies for that, Councillor Holly.
Okay, so the bottom line is the local bus support proposed investment, £400,000, is a one-off investment for 2023-24.
Correct. One-off revenue investment for 23-24,
Okay,
and we'll see what transpires in due course.
right, and that includes the levelling up and obviously everything else within this list.
Everything in the list is of a revenue nature. I can see the leader wants to, as indicated, he wishes to come in as well, Chair.
Okay, and it's the time scale. Can we have confirmation of the time scale? Is it 23-24 or 23-25 or whatever?
They all start on the basis they're 23-24, but because they are drawn from reserves, if any of them are not spent in 23-24, it is within my gift to advise Cabinet at outturn for 23-24 if they may be carried forward, and that again would be a decision for Cabinet at outturn for 23-24, probably around next June, July 24. So again, because these are revenue reserves, they can be carried forward. I make no presumption on that. I will give officer advice at the time, and I'm sure Cabinet members will make decisions in due course on that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith.
Leader, do you want to come in?
Yeah, if I could, just to be helpful here, I think we've got to go back to the principles of the ERF. And if you remember, I've said this at council as well when we've debated amendments to budgets, etc. One of the things Mr. Smith has cautioned against is adding long-term pressures to the council. So where we've made amendments to budgets or we've made decisions on ERF, they have been one-off decisions, whether they be a time-limited amount of additional revenue support or a funding for a capital scheme. That is the reason why Mr. Smith is able, therefore, to support the decisions that we've made on the basis that they do not become long-term base pressures, and that's one of the discussions that we've had at numerous budget meetings. So just to be clear, as with all of the other announcements that we've made, these are time bound for this year. But Mr. Smith is quite right to point out that should we find ourselves in the ability to make further announcements on things like bus services or anything else that potentially could be considered a priority for us, then we will make that decision at the time when Mr. Smith advises us what additional reserves or funds we may have in order to deploy. So yes, these are, for the purposes of the report, considered one-off, but my intention would be, subject to funding be available from whatever source, whether it be UK government, Welsh government, or where we find ourselves in an ability where we can deploy additional resources, that we will look to continue to support priorities as we would in any other budget.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Leader, and thank you, Mr. Smith. I did notice that there is obviously a financial energy saving as well for some of our partners as well, but that isn't in either these reports. But there is an issue that will need to be discussed at Cabinet. But thank you very much for your explanations. I think unless anybody else has got any questions, I'm quite happy. Thank you.
Well, I'm chairing it, so I have a question. In terms, I'm just looking at the additional spending in Appendix B. A lot of these will fit into existing programmes, which is fine. But there are a number of here which appear to be well, new items of expenditure which need to be allocated in some way or another. So, for example, youth engagement, disabled parking bay, drop curbs, CCTV cameras. What mechanism is going to be adopted to enable councillors to bid for those resources or to allocate those resources to ensure that they're spread evenly and fairly across the city? Lee, did you want to, or anyone else?
Be helpful again. So again, we're having discussions with the technical officers who are making some recommendations to us in terms of how we potentially could deploy that. I think one of the challenges for both the disabled parking bays, for instance, and the drop curbs is that they may be that we know that there are a number of historical requests which may no longer be the priority for members in their wards. But what we will seek to do is to come forward with an equitable way of ensuring that every ward is able to bid in to do some of the disabled parking bays and drop curbs in their wards. Given the nominal amounts that we're talking there of 75,000 for parking bays and 60,000 for drop curbs, it is not going to mean that we're able to do everything members would potentially want. But I think it's important that members are able to say what the priorities are for them in their wards if they have requests. And so that will figure then in terms of the works that are undertaken by highways and our technical teams. Likewise with patch, again, we've been discussing with the highways officers, and what we've tried to do is to match the level of investment with what the team believe they can deliver in terms of additional schemes during the year. So again, it would be crazy if we allocated money more than we were able to actually deliver, because then the money won't get spent. So what we've tried to do is to right size these in terms of what we can deliver, both in the period and with the resources that we have.
So in terms of things like CCTV, youth engagement, you'll basically look to ward members and find some mechanism whereby we can say there's a problem here. Can this money be allocated to that particular problem?
Yeah, so on the youth services, obviously we will take advice from professional officers.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
In terms of the best way to utilise that money in terms of youth engagement. We've been very successful in recent months in terms of getting to hard to reach youths to try and make sure that we engage them and where we can ensure that they don't get into the sorts of behaviours that would cause problems and take them down a track that we wouldn't want them to go. And then in terms of CCTV, that's far more straightforward. It's basically saying we're going to buy some equipment which is mobile, which can be moved from location to location, and it gives us more capacity so that where requests come in, our CCTV officers will then work with members to look at deploying that equipment for a period of time where a hotspot of antisocial behaviour is identified.
Okay, can I just come back to disabled parking bays? Historically, the Cumberland Ward councils have funded these through our community budgets. And the last lot which are currently going through, I think we must have put in about 15 to 18 of them, and about 3 actually met the criteria. There's a lot of work involved in carrying out that assessment. It takes a lot of officer time. And of course, at the end of the day, very small numbers of them actually meet the criteria. At the end of the day, you did say you're reviewing that criteria. What are you looking at in terms of that criteria to try to maybe improve the success rate when people bid for these?
Absolutely, Councillor Black, and I think that was our concern, which is you have 2 competing sets of criteria really that come into play here. Obviously, highways will have to take a view. Does it meet the legislation in terms of providing a disabled parking bay, which of course isn't person specific. It is there that anybody who meets the criteria can use, even though it may be being requested for a member, for a resident who has a specific challenge. And then the second part being the disability criteria that a specific resident may have, which is requiring them to request a parking bay near their home. So it's trying to balance those 2 competing pieces of criteria. What we've tried to do in the discussions with technical officers is, I'll give you an example. I'm aware of a resident who, for instance, lives on a hill. But the policy currently would suggest that if parking space is available at the bottom of the hill, that resident wouldn't qualify for the parking bay because there is suitable on-street parking nearby. What we wanted to do was to add a bit more sophistication in that, because if it means that the suitable parking is in a location that in essence cannot be accessed by that person with their disability, even though the space isn't specifically for them, then there's adding some more intelligent criteria, I think, around the assessment to try and make sure that we do get more schemes over the threshold. And that's what we're trying to do. It's not an easy job by any means, because we still have to make sure we meet the relevant criteria on each part of the legislation. But what we're trying to do is to add the human factor into this more in terms of the revised criteria we intend to bring forward.
And will some of this money be used for officer time to try to speed up the assessments, because they do take a long time at the moment, not for any fault of the officers, but simply because the resource isn't there?
I don't think that was the primary intention of this. I think there is already quite a backlog of requests that haven't been able to be serviced because we don't have the funds. And as you've mentioned, Councillor Black, I know a number of members are using their community budgets to fund. So this was additional resources to help really for members to get schemes done that have already met the criteria.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else got any questions at all? No? Okay. Can I thank you very much indeed for coming along at the last minute to deal with these, and we'll obviously write to you, the Cabinet, in due course, so you can have that letter on Thursday when you come to consider these reports. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on. So the next item is the Scrutiny Performance Panel Progress Report, Climate Change and Nature, and Councillor Hannah Lawson, who's making a debut as the convener on this report. Is Hannah there still? Yes, there she is. Hannah, do you want to add anything to this report at all?
I think most of the points are covered in the written report. Obviously, the number of meetings was slightly curtailed this municipal year due to national events. But I feel we had a very productive scrutiny panel. We had a particularly lively debate around the use of glyphosate and a lot of public inquiry there. But if anyone does have any further questions, then please feel free.
Okay. Anybody got any questions for Hannah at all on this report? I think we're all getting comments about glyphosate, Hannah, and the weed spraying, and I think there's an issue here of trying to put together some sort of strategy to maybe limit their use. But that, of course, is an executive decision. But you know that you'll keep pressing on that particular issue. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Hannah. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Item 7 next. Oh, it's now item 9, of course. Membership of scrutiny panels and working groups. We haven't got any changes to report on those. So the next item, which is on scrutiny letters. We've got one letter on co-production working group, which Councillor Lyndon Jones was the convener. He's not here. He's sent his apologies. So that's basically is for noting. So the last item the penultimate item is the end of year review 22-23. There's a report in front of you setting out the sort of work we've been doing. I'm really looking for people's feedback on how well you think we've done, whether you think we could have done better on things, whether there's anything which you think we should be doing in the future differently. Who wants to start? Anybody got any suggestions? Christopher, Councillor Holly.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of issues. I think one of the things that the Development and Regen Performance Panel recognised right from the start of when we done the one on tourism was how important tourism is for Swansea, and that we've asked that if we can have a report back of it. And I think one of the things that we have to recognise as a council is just what sort of level of employment that operates within the tourist industry, and as such give it that little bit more of a profile. So I think that was one that really struck us in that development. The service improvement and finance, I think the couple of things that stuck out from there, I think one was the equalities and culture one and the library standards. They were quite excellent. We came out quite well on that. The problem with the finance was it's always in reverse. It's always after the cabinet reports and the quarterly reports, and found that was quite difficult to justify having it that far away from the cabinet report, and that's a discussion that's got to be had in the future, I think. And I think those issues really were the main points that came up. And I think that in future we will look at having better pre-decision scrutiny because of this action today, and also about the tourism, how that we can investigate that more because of the importance to the number of jobs that are based in Swansea.
Okay, Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, as I say, I've been on that panel with Chris as well, and also with another committee was the procurement one, which, as I say, was a really good committee that where we've done a lot of in-depth work on that, and I believe this has given good recommendations, you know, where we can move forward as a council, and also to give us that support to the appropriate departments. You know, there were some issues that were being flagged up along the way in regards to procurement and understanding the procurement and involving opportunities for local businesses and that. But I think, you know, there were good recommendations from that, and that was very, very thorough. And I think the main aim is now is with the scrutiny conference coming up, is to get everybody involved, the backbenchers, and get them involved in scrutiny and the areas that would they like to look at. We can really set a good agenda for 2023, 2024, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. I think we have, of course, sent out a survey to all members asking them for their feedback on scrutiny. I don't think it's a bit early to have the results of that yet. I think members also be interested that every time we have a scrutiny session, we do actually send a questionnaire to cabinet members and officers, asking them to tell us about their experience, which is always fun. And they've been quite positive, to be fair. They've said that the purpose of scrutiny meetings has been clear, with topics of discussion being significant and important. Those attending meetings have felt well supported, and those carrying out scrutiny have been focused on the topics and asked pertinent questions, with discussion, debate being fair and balanced, and they found scrutiny meetings both useful and constructive, so that's helpful. The two suggestions is that I did at the beginning of the meeting, when we have hybrid meetings, the chair says who's in the physical room so that people online can actually know who them, and being careful not to stray into personal ward specific issues during scrutiny. So that's the feedback we've had from those particular questionnaires. Rebecca, you had something to say, sorry.
All right. Yeah, I guess my reflections are more on like the timing and structure of scrutiny as opposed to the individual topics that we've looked at this year. I think it is really important to make sure that the timing of scrutiny is right, because I have been in meetings where we've been looking at something where actually the implementation of what we're looking at, or a key decision or a key change, has either just happened or is about to happen. And therefore, whatever you discuss in that particular scrutiny meeting is going to be of limited value. And it does come into what Councillor White's just said, it does dissuade then people from being fully engaged because they want to feel like they're making a difference. So the example I would give, although it was a very positive, like probably the most positive meeting I was at in terms of scrutiny in the last year on co-production, actually our main conclusion was this is still very early days, and we would need to revisit this because there's limited amounts we can say at this point. So and then that kind of brings me on to the spreading it out appropriately, I suppose, because I noticed in the report it talks about ensuring that the work of scrutiny is manageable, realistic and achievable given resources available. And absolutely, we've been, I think, tried to be mindful of the pressures on officers, but there's also the pressures on councillors. So there's been a lot of topics this year just gone that have been very interesting. But when you consider something like the antisocial behaviour scrutiny, I always get the jargon the wrong way around, but inquiry, whichever one it is, it's there are so many stakeholders to talk to. It has been going for a long while now. So we've just got to be mindful that if something like that is going on, limiting perhaps some of the other stuff so that councillors can give it their full attention, they can read all the papers, because ultimately that work has got to produce recommendations. And if we've not been able to give our head to that work properly, those recommendations will again lose some of their value. So those are my reflections, really.
I think it's important that that the working groups in particular have the time to carry out that in-depth study of the work that they're looking at. I think that's really important as part of that. So I think that's very pertinent comments indeed. I think the other concern is in terms of capacity, because obviously we've got a year's grace in terms of possibly losing a scrutiny officer in the next financial year. So we're going to have to find a way of ensuring that we can continue the level of scrutiny we are at, maybe with less support. And that's something which we're going to have to work hard at over the next year to ensure that if that does happen in the next financial year, that we don't find that our ability to scrutinise the executive is diminished in any way. So that is a concern which I think we all are concerned, we all have. Yeah, did you want to come back? Sorry.
Yeah, just very briefly, it's just that for me, the focus is on the quality of the scrutiny work that we're doing, as opposed to the quantity necessarily.
Absolutely. I mean, quality is important, but I think we also need to get a good cross section. Particularly, you've got to cover social services. That's a really important part, and and when you have huge expenditure over finance and city centre development, you've got to try and cover that as well. So it's important. I think we get coverage as well as quality. Yeah. Anybody else got Francesca?
Thank you, Chair. I've actually really enjoyed Scrutiny, been on the first year. I think it's really important to scrutinise and be a critical friend, as you say, on a very wide range of topics. I think the only thing for me personally, I don't know if others feel the same, but we're always given reports, aren't we? And it's nice to get your teeth into, and as Rebecca mentioned, it is nice to sort of critique something and provide quality feedback. But sometimes we do have quite a number of reports. We've got a week to do it, and I think on top of other meetings as well. Just wondering if there was any, I appreciate officers are under huge pressure as well. If there's any, extra time that, I think even an extra couple of days can make a difference as maybe some councils, so that we can, sort of fully engage and be more productive towards the meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Mike, did you want to come back in? You're muted, so I can't hear what you're saying.
Chair, I think it would be very remiss of us if we didn't thank the work for Bridget's team has been doing for us. They are absolutely first class, I got to say. I've been involved in scrutiny quite a few years, and I got to be fair. The team, even before Bridget and Dave was there, they've always been a first class team. So I think thanks should be given to Bridget and his team.
I was actually going to wind up this session by saying that, but that's fine.
I'm sorry I stole the thunder, Chair.
No, that's fine. That's fine, Mike. I think you're absolutely right. We do rely on the officers tremendously to get the agendas out, to get these meetings working like clockwork, and they don't let us down. They work really hard at this, and getting out letters on time as well is important. So that's really going, and they go above and beyond often as well. So we do need to acknowledge that as well. Yeah. Anybody else? Paxton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to second what Mike said. Basically, the work that they do is phenomenal, and certainly the support I get, I couldn't cope easily without, that's for sure. I would really struggle, but I'm sure now you're going to third it afterwards anyway, so I'll leave it to you there now.
I think actually you were thirding me, Paxton, so...
Oh, my apologies, Chairman. I'm quite willing to accede to that, yes.
Yes, okay. Anybody else, anything else they want to say on this at all? I mean, it's been very helpful, very constructive feedback. So that's good, and we'll make a note of that. And I'm going to come on now to where we're going from now. The new municipal year, right? So we have the council AGM on the 18th of May, which will reappoint the Scrutiny Programme Committee as a council body. We will have a short meeting of the committee immediately afterwards to elect the chair and vice chair for the 23-24. We're currently planning a scrutiny work planning conference for Tuesday, the 13th of June at 4 p.m. Everybody, non-executive councillors are invited to that, discuss the future work programme and contribute ideas. We're going to do it in person. in the Lord Mayor's reception room, and there'll be further information following on that. And although we'll be discussing the new scrutiny work programme in due course, we are, anybody wants to share ideas at this stage about any topics, or, email myself or Bridge about that would merit scrutiny in the future, please do so. And you will have a chance to contribute ideas to the work planning conference in June. And ultimately, we will then set the work programme in July for people to move forward on that. We are currently looking at a pre-decision scrutiny of the Cabinet report on the Oxford Street Community Hub project, which was meant to be done today but has been delayed. That's hopefully the final outturn on that particular project. If that goes to head in Cabinet on the 15th of June, then we'll have a special committee meeting at 3 p.m. on the 13th of June, leading into then the planning conference. So you only have to come into the Guildhall once, you just got to come in an hour earlier to do that. So that is where we're at the moment in terms of moving forward in the next few months. If it does proceed in the Cabinet, we will let you know that meeting is going to take place. Okay, so dates and time of upcoming scrutiny panel working groups. We haven't got any at the moment because we're now moving into the annual council meeting. Anybody got anything else they want to raise on these? No? Okay. Oh, it's always
What do you want to report back to the Cabinet on Thursday?
Yeah. We're going to produce a letter to Cabinet, basically summarising the discussion. Councillor Holly, who asked me to call me, volunteered to go to Cabinet to actually do the presentation on Thursday. So we'll report back, and we'll circulate the letter for members to have a look at before we send the letter off. So you'll be able to comment on the letter to council. Basically, I think we're just going to summarise the discussion. But I don't think there's any particular points we were going to raise. Just no on that particular item. If members happy with that, okay. Good. Okay, thank you very much for coming. I will see you at the annual council next. So thank you very much indeed for coming, and I declare the meeting closed. And